Okay, I think it's working now. Um, Turns out you do have to turn the microphone on in order for it to work. So if you could just let me know if you hear me. Oh, no sound still. Okay. Well, that's weird because now it does look like it's working. I think we're good now. Okay. I do think it's working. Um, Perfect. Okay. All right. So third session today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This is an oil painting that I started 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to wrap it up today. The plan for today is going to be to kind of work my way through in the following way. I want to start with these transparent colors, really nice and thin, and see what I can accomplish just with that before I build in some thicker and more opaque paint into the layers. And then eventually I want to finish it up with some like really textured palette knife stuff. So we'll be doing some mixing. You'll see what I'm mixing on the palette, and we'll jump in. But really, I think the main thing to take away with that is, again, it's with that attention to the consistency of the paint. So starting really thin leaves you a little bit more room during this painting session to build up to thicker paint. You don't need to start with terribly thick paint right out of the gate. I think it's a little bit better for my purposes, for this painting at the very least, just to kind of begin by doing a little glazing. So I was spending a few minutes looking at this piece just before this broadcast started, and I think what I want to do is glaze through. I put a couple new colors on the palette, and I want to use those to glaze through. This is an India yellow. It's a very intense color, but I do feel like there needs to be more zing in the green. And I think I see some opportunities to kind of work this color into the water in the foreground. So thinking about it, I was kind of drawn to that idea of creating this like little pathway of color. And let me show you the shape that I sort of envisioned just from looking at the reference. So see how thin that is? I'm not sure you can really, you probably can see the color change a little bit, but it's a subtle color change, very thin. This isn't going to be like, a giant visual change, but rather just like another layer in the complexity. I see this little movement through the foreground of the reference, if you can kind of see that on the lower left-hand side. And I thought that might relate kind of nicely to getting a little bit more color saturation in this green on the hillside. And that one, I think I'm going to go ahead and darken up a little bit. A little bit of viridian green into that India yellow. I just want to like see this color a bit more on the green. There we go. That yellow again. So starting thin like this, I'm just using maybe a tiny bit of my medium. And that is just a linseed oil mixed with Gamsol. I put that in a squirt bottle because that way you don't have a jar to dip into that just gets dirty as you dip that brush in. I want to use this like mixture of paint to keep the layers that I put in last week You can see them through this paint. Yeah, isn't that a big color shift? I'm not sure I'm totally loving it here, but I think it's going to be okay underneath in response to the chat comment there. The big color shift, yeah, it is. Definitely. I definitely feel like I like the direction it's going, at least here, this hillside, but by comparison, the water needs a little bit more. And I'm using this to also like do a little bit more kind of planar sculpting, separating one plane from the next. It is a darker value and it's thin and transparent, so I can get this nice, if I flick with the brush really quickly and lightly over the surface, it just emphasizes like this little directional mark, you know? That's nice for texture, nice for movement. Definitely a nice glazing color. It's very see-through. So even in this painting that already has like palette knife areas, I think it's useful to have some variety and difference. I'm going to shift this color now because I'm into this area of the rocks that's definitely more violet. So I took this Prussian blue, Viridian green, and then a little bit of the quinacridone magenta, and now I have this much more like violety neutral green, because I know that violety neutral green makes sense to everybody out there, right? So let's see what I mean by violety neutral green. Let's see if that's gonna, well, it's got all the ingredients of violet, and it's kind of neutralized with that Prussian blue and Viridian. So instead of being like a magenta, it's just this really deep, deep, dark color that really pops against the background color there. And that's the important thing. I think it's like, you know, all dark colors need to take into account what you're painting it into. So if it's a kind of cooler area, you might want to go a little bit warmer. And you'll get a little bit of color contrast that way. I'm still on to this nice thin dark situation. I'm just going to step back from it for 1 second. Look at it. It's very important to step back. Even though it's only like a 16 by 20 inch canvas here, it really is larger than you can kind of confidently, you know, make decisions about from 3 feet in front of it. You sort of need to be a bit farther back to see what's what. I like the direction it's going. I don't really see anything going off the rails with what I'm doing. Confidence restored. All right, I'm going to keep going and try to just make some little transparent marks, useful marks that will translate into these shadowy areas in the hillside. They're very purple, and I really want to emphasize that kind of purpley quality to them because I want that yellow green as I work to become much more zingy. That's why I squeezed out the India yellow. Just want that to be a very nice color combination that really, like, one sets off the other. So I'm looking for a good transparent violet. And it's taking me a moment to find that. I might find a little like teal violet. That's pretty. But don't panic. If you can't find the color that you want right away, like I do this too. I often will just kind of, you know, I'm taking a few stabs at it. And it's not that I can't mix the colors, it's just I can't get the vision of like what I kind of want to happen there. I'm still trying to figure out what color that's going to be. It takes a minute. It's going to have an opportunity to develop, even if I don't get it right now. Let's see. I'm going to move away from it. Like, I think that's moderately successful, but there's something missing from that color area. I think it's like this blue. That would look really good in that shadow. That's what I'm going to do. Okay. So it's the blue from the water. I'm going to take that blue from the water and I'm going to like dust that through the shadow shapes of this little hillside. But first I'll kind of do this really dark transparent through here. I think that'll work. And I might be going a little bit too far with this color, but we will deal with that later. That's okay. That's okay. I think it's like a super effective color, and I'm using it so super thinly that it's not going to do much damage. And it still feels like it's doing me some good, you know? And I think like if you have a color that is chipping away and like adding to the description of what you're painting, you're using it here and you're using it there, kind of keep going until you run out of steam with it. But just be very aware of when you actually do run out of steam with it. Because if you keep going too far with that color, you know, it sort of works against you. So see if I can just sharpen up that a little too high. I'm going to sharpen up this little compositional line here, knowing that I'm going to come back with the palette knife on the water and really build this paint up. So the fact that I just marked it down a little lower than intended and a little sloppier, that's okay. All right. I want to just shoot this little dark color through, and I want it to be a little bit more liquidy. So like a short order cook, I've got my little like bottle of oil. I always feel like it's like a grill or something. And I mean, it's fun. It is like cooking, you know? Lots of different ingredients. Use them in a million different ways. So here we go. A really transparent kind of, I would call this like a more wet mixture of paint. I want to make like a lot of little like jagged detail-y marks through here because this is a quick painting and I want to shorthand some information. I don't want to have to, you know, render. This dark sweeping across. I like this color could be a little bit of a scumbly color too. It's a little drier on the brush right now. So I'm just kind of flicking the brush across the surface. Okay. And then back to the water. I want to use this. I want to emphasize this dark here. And I want to emphasize this dark, and it's kind of like a relationship between that side and that side. Maybe we could like pick that up here. I like to go back to that style of thinking, you know, like not so much concerned with like, oh, it's this color and value and shape exactly, but like more like it's the gesture of like how does the dark paint or what color I'm using sort of move through. I think that really creates some, I don't know, something interesting, a nice rhythm. It doesn't feel as like stiff and static when I paint that way. So that's sort of how I tend to like to bring in a little bit of a dynamic quality in here. I feel like I've reached the end of the road with my thin transparent paint, and now it's time to commit and to really get into it and some mixing. So probably what I'll do is just like clean this palette up just a little bit and just take a sip of water. So typically I like to work from background to foreground, and that's a really sensible way to work. It's a default, you know, doesn't mean that you absolutely have to. Clearly, I don't stick to it, but as I'm organizing like my session of work on a painting, I do tend to, now that I'm through that transparent phase, I'm going to assess this kind of from background to foreground. But there's another factor for like, where do you start? Because I think, that's the question I'm asking myself. And that's the question that most people have when they come back to a painting. Like, what do I do first? It's kind of a mixture between like that formulaic background to foreground, and you want to look at what are the biggest changes needed on this piece. What is visually missing? Try to keep it moving, try to keep it kind of developing where everything's like sort of along the same pace. And as I look at this, I already know I kind of like the sky as is. There's going to be a little bit of change should time allow, and not, we'll see. But I feel like the water is actually what needs the biggest visual change. So although background to foreground is a great way to approach things in terms of like practicality, I guess, and just, I don't know, what's the word? Well, yeah, practicality. Just, it's a very practical way to work. I do feel like this sort of takes, precedent. It's more important to think about those big visual changes. So I'm going to try and jump in with some mixing of these blue colors. Grab cloth and wipe down the palette a little bit. All right, so for this next portion, before especially I'm applying with a palette knife, I'm just spending a little time just developing enough paint to work with. It's typically a much, more time is spent mixing paint than applying it. I think that's a pretty typical situation you're going to find yourself in as a painter. For oil paint, I really like to work on a glass palette because you can just scrape it off, clean it off, and use a glass scraper to clean it at the end of your session. Right now, I'm just kind of mixing some generic piles of blue paint. And then we're going to see what they need, and, we'll adjust, but we got to start someplace. Oops. And I have a printed copy of this reference, and I'm sort of using the reference that I printed as my guide for color mixing, but not in a strict way at all. I'm not trying to match these colors too specifically. It's more like if they work for the painting. What I really do find in that painting, I'm just going to choose a different palette knife. A little smaller, and it's very flexible. That's one thing about palette knife painting is you really do want like that bend, that ability for your knife to kind of put different amounts of pressure on the surface. Generally, I think the water is a bit dark. I mean, it is a bit dark. I don't even just think it, I know it. It's a bit dark. So that's fine. In fact, that's sort of like how I would say I would recommend starting that way. It's nicer to have your dark colors underneath and build up those lighter colors on top. I'm thinking about again, like the placement of these is really just almost like a rhythm of these shapes, you know? And so keeping in mind that where you place these colors, there's an interval between them. That's kind of like what we're looking at. And they create these pathways, you know? They really just kind of wrap the viewer through, bring the viewer through the composition. I'm kind of thinking this way, and then there's these little scallopy edges coming this direction. And I'm going to take a little bit of like a burnt sienna and burnt umber together. I'm neutralizing this blue just a little bit. And I want it to have a little bit of warmth in it because I want it to relate to those hills. Pretty color. All right, and moving up from here. I'm going to start here at the bottom and move my way back. Put in some lighter marks back in. I had those sort of as the canvas showing through, and it's really important for me to kind of replace those eventually. So we're replacing those like visual light areas that were just the raw canvas, hopefully, with some actual paint. Now, for this color, I don't see it as a very cool white when I hold it up to the reference. I actually see like a little bit of a pink tone to it. And I think that's going to be great because the light is so pink, so warm, you know? So let's just even add a little touch of yellow to it. Yeah, that color really has a lot more pop. It's orange, you know, effectively. I just did like an orange against blue. And I'm really kind of like buttering this on there and just hoping it's going to look amazing. There's that little bit of yellow underneath that I glazed on earlier. And I want those like transparent moments to stay as much as possible. More paint. And of course, it's white. So just, you know, anytime you buy paint, buy twice as much white as every other color because you're going to use it to lighten everything and you will need it. That's very pink. So if you are stopping by throughout this video, and you could please give me a follow, like, subscribe, what have you, be much appreciated. I'm trying to reach, and I will get there eventually. We'll just see how long it is. I hope it's this summer. Trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and we're like 1/10 of the way there. So moving right along, moving right along. Now, also on that front, feel free to drop a comment if you would like to request a specific subject, either for a painting or an instructional video. Typically, I'm going to be painting in oil generally, but I'm very open to demonstrating other topics, materials, concepts. Whatever you have a request for is probably something I could help you with. I hope. And I have this like mixture of like kind of less painty areas, if that makes sense. Like a little bit thinner paint, a little more layers showing through. And I'm really trying to try to maintain that. You want to put my reference down for 1 second because I'm going to need 2 hands for this next part. I feel like every so often it's just required that you're going to need to clean off your palette knife. Moving my paint table back a little bit and really getting set up here. So I'm cleaning that off, if you can see that, just cleaning the palette knife off between marks. And you can like do a little bit of flicking the paint around. Just even what's already on the surface. So I've got some good paint on here. It doesn't all happen in the first mark, if that's, you have to sort of take what's on the surface and, you know, develop it a little bit. I feel like that's getting far more wavy. Really like that pink purple in there. I don't know if it's reading on screen, but. And then I want to get super dark blue. Lots of Prussian blue in this. Of course, we know isn't phthalo blue. All right. And now I'm going for like 1 level up, I guess, from that really dark. I want to fill a little bit into some of these areas. And I'm really just kind of, I'm trying to move along before I get too locked into one area. Just like thinking about the entirety of the painting and how we want to move around. Don't get locked into one thing. Things become apparent gradually, you know? So I think just like that, we want to keep our work within the area also as broad as possible. So now we're working in the water, but instead of like zoning out into that foreground area, which I'm apt to do, I'm not saying I'm not. That is my tendency. I could do it. But I'm correcting myself here. I'm trying to move around because I know that that's the better path to success after years of failing at it, right? Like, or trying to figure out what is it that's going to make this possible. And it's really just keeping as general to specific. I shouldn't say years of failing at it. What I mean really is like, I mean, that's something I continue to work on. I'll know what I mean. Pink reading. All right. Yeah, I like that pink. I think that's good. Happy with that. This water is very dark. I don't know. Probably a little too early to say, but I think it's a bit dark. So a little more teal in this area. It's decorative frosting, you know? Sort of does feel like it's butter or something, you know? It's really that same consistency that you're working with. So much paint. When I do these paintings, I'm like, it better turn out because and it does make some people, on a serious note, it does make some people very uncomfortable to use this much paint. There's just a certain kind of, you know, way of thinking that you want to conserve your paint and not use it, but you really need a lot of material to do this kind of painting. It's just got to go down pretty heavily on the surface. You need a lot of paint to work with. And then when you start that off in a painting, everything else in the painting, by comparison, looks very thin and underdone. So you really end up building up quite a bit. It's a commitment. And then you can kind of do these little like where you put down a little dollop of paint on the surface, and then maybe you clean off your knife a little bit. You just go back and like, oh, well, paint it over it too much, but you can work with what's there. I want to fill in these underdone kind of holes in the surface. Not sure if those are terribly visible, but there's a few places that don't have quite the surface of everywhere else. Now, I've worked in the water for a good little while now, and I don't want to let other areas sort of suffer and lag behind, but I do feel like I'm still kind of in the middle of this operation. Just thinking out loud here, the kind of thing I go through. Yeah, so let me just see if I can quickly wrap up at least this pass over the water, but I don't have that much time, so it might be the last pass over the water. I did intend to do this in 3. All right, so let's just see if we can wrap up the water then, I guess. Ticket. That's pretty fun. I really am enjoying painting this water right now. Trying to leave a little variation, trying to like, use those layers I've built up, not obliterate everything. That's the plan. Whoops. I feel like I keep knocking into every single item and camera in my studio, but let me just squeeze out a little more paint. Be right back. The beautiful cobalt teal, which, if you don't know, is one of my absolute favorites, and really, for me, has sort of replaced cerulean blue. And what else? What else did I need? Maybe some more white. Just calmly finishing the painting in the next 20 minutes, you know. All right. You'll see if that happens. We'll try. All right. Here we go. Oh, wrong knife. The other knife is a little bit, I don't know, sharp, shall we say? It has like no rounded edges, and it sort of makes me feel like I'm going to slice right through my painting, and I like it much more for mixing. I'm not sure if there are, you know, more guidelines on palette knife usage that I can give you, except by all means it needs to be flexible. But then any size and any shape you are comfortable using, experiment with those marks that it's going to make, you know, have some fun with it. All right, I want to get a little bit more. Whoop. Something like that. I really like that little horizontal kind of white cap situation. I feel very Bob Ross right now. That's really fun. I'm going to overdo it if I'm not careful, though. This is just my way. All right, but moving back into a little bit more texture, even through here, I can light this area up just a little bit with some of that same pink from the water. Mm-hmm. Variation here. Where else? Maybe through here. A little scumbling kind of. Just turning that palette knife and letting it sort of hit the canvas randomly is always a great strategy to get that color on without overthinking it. Like a purpley brown, kind of useful. I guess I'm just moving into this area. That's what's happening here. I just want to relate a little bit of texture. You don't want one area feeling like it has a totally separate approach. So keeping those colors moving through, but also keeping those like marks and textures and the amount of paint you're using if not moving through, at least balanced and like considered, right? So like you don't need to finish everything to the same degree. And by all means, leaving some areas a little bit underdone can be lovely. But you should at least be considering, how these colors, and look, here I am back in the water, how these colors kind of work together. Hold on. Hold, please. So that your areas of interest are sort of planned, and you have these relationships between like really heavily painted areas and more lightly painted areas that are like considered, or at least more intentional. Now I'm just kind of like dragging this palette knife through to, I don't know, smooth, unify. It's not smoothing necessarily. Is it doing? I think it's kind of organizing some of the paint into a more like clear plane, I hope. So it's taking some of these little stripy marks, adding like a little bit of a feel of maybe a gradient. I really got to get out of there, and I'll come back to it if I can. But let's, one more little bit to like anchor this rock formation here. It needs a touch of like a really dark, 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 dark. Right, seriously, I have to get out of here, get out of this water. There I go again. And just like every painter, I'm sure you can relate, even if you have painted, one painting in your life. It's really hard to stick to your plan, and things call out to you at all times. Like, here, I'm distracting you from your plan. Come over here and work on me. So much is happening in a painting that I just feel like it's a miracle we get to the end. But there are ways, and we can keep coming back and like getting back into the right method, the right way to work on it. You can pull yourself back when you're out of it. When you're totally lost, you can take a step back and you can get back on track. So painting is very forgiving. And right now, trying to look at this big picture. I'm trying to think about little things I can do for the next, 12 to 15 minutes. And I really want to get into those greens that we talked about. And at the beginning, I mentioned I was bringing out a couple new colors onto this palette, which is this one here is India Yellow, and mixed with a little bit of Prussian Blue. It really gives you this like kind of acidic, I think it's a really cool color. It's not necessarily a beautiful color, but I think it's a beautiful color. Maybe not widely thought of as like, wow, that's a real winner. People tend to not love this color, I would say. but I think it's working. I'm going to use a little bit of the cadmium yellow lemon. Any color name, though, that has that really bright, kind of zingy yellow color, cadmium, or maybe the cadmium replacements, if those are actually worthwhile now. I don't know. If anyone's tried them, let me know. Hmm. Wow. Well, this is interesting. This is like my palette knife of 10 years and it just died. Little tip just broke right off. But luckily, I've got two. Here's my other one. So there we go. I added a little bit of white to that color just so we can really get a sense of the yellow. And what I mean by that is the white will sort of tend to open up the color and let you sort of see what it's all about a little bit more. Sometimes if the color is too dark, you can't really place like what hue it is. It's just a dark color. So adding that touch of white just helps it become a little more visible. I'm gonna go a little more magenta into that color. All right, and what I'm left with is this really nice kind of like amber looking color that I think I'm just gonna find a use for as long as I've got it. And that use might be to create a little more feeling of texture, warmth in these colors over here. And then just some more texture because really we can't see texture unless there's some form of contrast. So I have all this like blue purple and popping in just like a little bit of this warmer color. And now I'm sort of mixing two things on my palette knife just to really make it random. Ooh, maybe that's too much. I like it. I just went back over that mark that I thought was too much. And sometimes that's how it goes. It's really just a luck of the draw situation. With palette knife painting, you might just get a mark accidentally that just works. And of course, we can all understand that the opposite of that is also true. All right, and I want to build up a little bit more texture. I really like this front formation of rock that I painted it all last week, but I do need a little more balance here. Grab my reference again. This has opportunity to develop here a little bit more. And color-wise, I kind of like where that yellow is going moderately, as long as I don't go overboard with it. I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of quinacridone magenta into it. Pink. And a touch of blue. I think that might give me like some nice color that's going to work through here. I just mixed up a more kind of pink purpley shadowy version for the side. Pull that down a little bit. Yellow and purple meaning, being opposites, we can use those to create a gray. And just kind of layering those together hopefully gives it that sense of form, and you get the sense of the texture of the rock at least. Maybe it's not a photorealistic representation, but I think in a lot of ways it is more, I don't want to say it's more interesting because then photorealists are going to be mad at me, but like it's just what I'm more interested in personally. I'm seeing and painting, and like that's what I sort of pursue in my own work, right? So it's not a strict interpretation. It's just an excuse for like color and shape. And this is, okay, we're circling back to using that color from the water in those shadow shapes. I'm going to try and approximate the color. All right. Very blue and dusty looking. And I think that's just how it looks, under that bright sunshine. Like those shadows look purple. That one is particularly painty, meaning there is a lot of paint in that little number right there that I just painted. I'm not sure it's totally reading, so I just want to work in this area a little bit. See if we can't tone that down a bit. I guess it's just grabbing too much attention for me. All right. Some trees. I really haven't worked back into this distant hillside very much. Let's just see if there's a little bit I can do with texture to tie it in. Like I was saying, we do want to be intentional about our paint surface choices. We don't want to just leave things to chance. And I did leave that to last because it is the most distant. And, you know, ultimately, if you have thinner paint, that's probably where you want it. You do want that receding into the background. But let's see if we can just amp it up a little bit so that it sort of feels like it's in the same picture. Miraculously, I got a great color this first go around. That's great. All right. Sometimes you just get that color, and sometimes you don't. It takes a minute. And at the very least, I can just take a few little palette knife marks here just to build up some texture, create these little tree-like shapes, and that's in a really similar color to what was underneath. An important thing to note. And now I'm going to try and go back just a little bit darker to emphasize those a bit, because again, we can't see texture really without value contrast. Let's just put a few little light marks toward the bottom just to give it that sense of like crashing. This is very Bob Ross. This is fun. Be an opportunity just to draw a little bit more attention to it if I can successfully heal up this color, because it's really close to this tiny little bit of orange. Let's just see. A little like lighter teal, I think, would be kind of cool too. Mirror that a little bit. And hopefully I'm not opening up a whole can of worms here. I'm going to just take that lighter teal out a little further. I mean, the key to this painting really is the water, so let's just make it work. There's just something about like palette knife paint. It just leaves the most like beautiful surface as you kind of scrape across it. It's just so pretty. I'm gonna work with this just a little bit more. Out of time, schmout of time. So next week we are closed. The studio is closed for spring break, so we probably will not do a live session, but with any luck, I will be uploading some instructional stuff at that time. So there's still something by instructional stuff. I do have something in mind. There's only one more little part that I'm gonna need to see a little bit more here. All right, so if you were about to go and eat lunch or what have you, sorry, hold on a second. We'll be done shortly. I do just want to mix up this little purpley gray color and just bring a little bit more information and attention into this side of the canvas, but much lighter. There we go. All right. So again, thanks so much for joining, and let me know if you guys have any requests for future videos. I'll be thinking about my next subject matter for a Wednesday live painting. So if you do have any requests, make sure to let me know in the chat. And if you would prefer to just check out our website, it's insightfineartstudio.com, or even take a class with us in person if you're local to the Chicago area. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you.